I've been thinking this for a long time, but where exactly do you go when you say you're on a business trip? I know what you're doing, and I have evidence. I couldn't finish my sentence before my husband's angry voice interrupted me. Don't you dare speak to me like that! As he spoke, his arm stretched out, and he pushed me with all his might. I lost my balance and fell backwards. Lying on the floor, I looked up to see my husband looking down at me with disdain. Ugh, ugly and fat. That's what you are. Serves you right. He sneered. I felt a sharp pain in my head and could feel my consciousness fading away. When I woke up, I was in an unfamiliar place, lying on a hospital bed. Apparently, I had been brought to the hospital. Seeing that I had regained consciousness, my daughter Ruby, sitting beside me, nodded with tears streaming down her face. Tears filled my eyes as well. When I came home from school, I found you collapsed at the front door. I was so shocked I didn't know what to do, so I immediately called Dad. I told him you were hurt and that he needed to come home right away, but he said it was impossible because he was at work, and he hung up. Then, Ruby, you called me. You were so panicked that I called an ambulance right away. What happened? I told my parents everything about the mistreatment from my husband for over 10 years since Ruby was born. I also told them about the injury today, caused by being pushed while my husband was trying to meet his mistress. Dad began to speak slowly. Come back home with Ruby, he said kindly. Then his tone changed suddenly. And we'll make sure Jacob pays for what he did to Susan. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. He said, My name is Susan. I'm a 43-year-old housewife. I was born into a very ordinary family, where my dad, who works hard as a bus driver, is supported by my mom, a housewife. Dad has a gentle nature and has always treated me kindly. I remember thinking as a child that the passengers must feel safe with such a kind-hearted driver. Mom has a very calm personality, and she and Dad seem to be on the same wavelength, as I've never seen them fight or argue. Growing up in such a peaceful household, it's natural that I turned out to be a quiet person. I'm neither particularly intelligent nor active, nor strikingly beautiful or cute, just plain ordinary. By the way, I have a younger sister who is 3 years my junior. Despite being raised in the same household, she's much more put together, and people often couldn't tell who was the older sister when we were younger. My sister has always prioritized her career over marriage, dedicating herself solely to her job, a path completely different from mine. While I also worked for a company, I just went through the motions, never standing out, holding a position that neither garnered high praise nor poor reviews from my superiors. It was in this setting that I fell into an office romance with a man who is now my husband, Jacob. Jacob was tall, with a great figure, handsome in an elegant way, and, to top it off, had a kind personality. Being competent at his job, he was popular not just within our office, but also among women from client companies. When someone like Jacob confessed he wanted to date me, it just showed that life is full of surprises. Given my unassuming and shy nature, universally acknowledged, I was convinced it was a deceit and became incredibly guarded for a while. There's no way someone like Jacob could fall for someone like me, I thought. Despite my doubts, Jacob continued his earnest advances. Though I told no one, I secretly harbored feelings for him, making it impossible not to be conscious of his presence. Gradually, I began to welcome his intentions with joy, and with each meeting, my wariness faded. Before I knew it, I had accepted Jacob. Jacob said that kindness mattered more to him than glamour, and he saw an ideal partner in someone like me. Completely swept up in this drama-like development, I fell deeply in love with Jacob, becoming utterly infatuated. Soon after we started dating, we got married. I quit my job to support Jacob as a housewife. Though my sister would likely have continued her career, having seen my mother happily fulfill her role as a housewife, it felt like the natural course for me, and Jacob was pleased with the decision. We were blessed with a child shortly after our marriage, a daughter we named Ruby, following a discussion. With financial help from my parents, we bought our home upon Ruby's birth. In the years following my relationship with Jacob, I felt as if I was at the peak of happiness in my life. Or, at least, I was supposed to be. I was indeed happy until I came to know my husband's true nature. His behavior started to change shortly after our daughter Ruby was born. He used to call me Susan by my name, but it changed to hey, abruptly. I sensed something off with this shift, but dismissed it as not worth fussing over. However, my husband's attitude grew increasingly arrogant, and my discomfort escalated proportionally. Then, a definitive incident occurred. Struggling with my postpartum weight, my husband coldly remarked, "Aren't you ashamed of that body shape? An ugly body and face? That's the worst, isn't it? Right? Ugly and fat lady?" From that day forward, he would mockingly call me ugly and fat lady at every opportunity, laughing derisively. Before long, my husband's return home began to get later and later. His arrivals at midnight or even early morning became more frequent. One day, I noticed the scent of perfume on his suit, a fragrance clearly worn by a woman, and not one of mine. The moment I realized this, rage filled my mind. My distrust towards my husband only grew by the day, reaching a point where it felt like my grievances could explode at any moment. I can't take it anymore, I thought, utterly drained by my husband's continual arrogance and his habit of coming home late after drinking. One night, I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer and confronted him as he returned home in his usual state. "I'm tired too. Taking care of a child is incredibly hard. Instead of drinking every day, come home earlier and help out. Spend more time with your daughter." I shouted, unable to believe I was raising my voice at someone like this, but the rising anger was uncontrollable. Sitting in the living room, my husband, his face reddening further from the alcohol, stood up and hurled a chair at me. "I'm out drinking for work. Can't you understand that, you ugly and fat lady? Taking care of a child is hard. Work is much harder. It must be nice just being with the child all day. That's why you stay in that ugly shape. If you have a complaint, why don't you go out and earn the money yourself?" He yelled with a furious expression that made me fear for my life. After this incident, I was too scared to provoke any violence, choosing to say nothing to avoid angering my husband. He never raised his hand to me again, but instead, he started giving me only $200 for the monthly living expenses. "We can't live on this," I protested, to which he responded with a sarcastic smile. "Being a housewife must be so easy for you. You should learn to manage on $200 a month. Isn't managing the budget part of a housewife's job?" Fear of upsetting him forced me to comply with this unreasonable demand. I supplemented the insufficient household income by dipping into the savings I had from before I was married, but the hardship of living frugally grew day by day. I seriously considered leaving my husband and wished from the bottom of my heart for a divorce. However, the thought of my young daughter held me back. I couldn't support her on my own without an income. Going back to my parents' home would only worry them. I convinced myself that staying was better than leaving, despite the difficulty of making ends meet. Nonetheless, the problem of insufficient living expenses remained unsolved. Determined to make the most of the $200, I took my husband's mocking suggestions seriously and started learning about saving money. Interestingly, as I got into it, saving money became fun. I discovered various ways to save, which felt rewarding when they worked. I even began researching and devising new saving methods on my own. Eventually, I wanted to share the joy of saving with others and started blogging about it. To my surprise, the blog's readership grew beyond my expectations, eventually earning me advertising revenue. Before I knew it, I was making as much as my husband's salary from my blog. The financial worries faded away, and I could feel myself becoming mentally more stable. I was incredibly busy juggling parenting and my savings blog, but I was satisfied with my fulfilling days. Before I knew it, more than 10 years had passed since my husband threw a chair at me. My daughter had grown into a middle schooler and was living her life energetically, while my husband remained unchanged. One night, during a weekend, my husband's mobile phone, left on the living room table, started ringing. He was in the shower, and the ringtone continued without him to answer it. It was unlike him to leave his mobile phone unattended. Driven by a momentary curiosity, I peeked at the screen. The caller was listed as Mary. I immediately knew she was his affair partner. Though I had suspected him of cheating, having a name attached to my suspicions made it all too real, and I couldn't help but feel shaken. My husband came out of the shower. "Your phone was ringing," I said, trying to sound as indifferent and composed as possible, not wanting him to detect my turmoil. His face changed. He tried to mask his agitation with a stern look, but his unsettled gaze gave him away. "Did you look at my phone?" he asked in a low voice, probing. "No," I replied, my voice trembling slightly, worried that I might have angered him. Whether he believed me or not, he took his mobile phone with a sullen expression and went into the bedroom. As soon as he was out of sight, tears started to stream down my face. I wasn't sure if I was relieved that he didn't get angry or shocked that his affair was confirmed. What became clear was that I couldn't let what my husband had done to me go unaddressed any longer. I couldn't be at peace with myself otherwise. The next day, I bought a voice recorder. It was to record my husband's conversations on the phone in our bedroom. I also decided to keep another recorder with me at all times to capture any verbal abuse directed at me. But that wasn't enough. I hired a detective agency to catch my husband in the act of cheating. Unaware of my actions, he was easily caught in compromising photographs. I gathered all this evidence for a divorce. I no longer had financial worries. My daughter Ruby was grown enough to understand the decision to divorce. All that was left was to go through with the divorce. However, simply divorcing wasn't enough to clear the lingering dissatisfaction in my heart. When I brought up divorce, I wanted to make it clear that the fault lay with my husband, and to have him acknowledge and reflect on his actions. That's why I needed solid evidence. After the incident with the mobile phone, my husband's behavior towards me worsened more than ever. Perhaps feeling confident that I wouldn't confront him about his cheating, he began staying out overnight more frequently. He claimed these were business trips, but as someone who married a coworker, I knew better. There were hardly any business trips involved in his department's work, a fact I was well aware of. While I felt the shallowness of my husband's actions, being lied to with such a transparent lie felt like an insult to me, and it angered me. As my patience with my husband's infidelity wore thin, I deeply despised him and was waiting for the right moment to bring up divorce. One morning, in the year when Ruby became a 9th grader, my husband hurried down the stairs with his carry-on suitcase. "I have to go on a sudden business trip," he said as he headed towards the entrance, and then, with a tone full of sarcasm, added, "I've been eating nothing but tasteless food, so maybe I'll enjoy something delicious for a change." His snide remark made my anger boil over. "Excuse me? Don't joke with me. What do you mean by tasteless food? I prepare dinner every day, not even knowing if you'll come home to eat it or not. I've been thinking this for a long time. But where exactly do you go when you say you're on a business trip? I know what you're doing, and I have evidence." I couldn't finish my sentence before my husband's angry voice interrupted me. "Don't you dare speak to me like that!" As he spoke, his arm stretched out, and he pushed me with all his might. I lost my balance and fell backwards. Lying on the floor, I looked up to see my husband looking down at me with disdain. "Ugly and fat, that's what you are. Serves you right." He sneered and left the house with a nasty laugh. I felt a sharp pain in my head, perhaps from hitting the floor hard. The frustration of being pushed and insulted by my husband was unbearable. As I lay there, I could feel my consciousness fading away. When I woke up, I was in an unfamiliar place, lying on a hospital bed. My daughter Ruby and my parents were standing by the bed, looking at me worriedly. It seemed I had been brought to the hospital. "Mom, are you okay?" Ruby asked, tears streaming down her face. She had been crying for a while, as her eyes and the area around them were red. "Ruby, did you save me?" I asked, feeling relieved as I regained consciousness. Ruby nodded, crying even harder. Tears welled up in my eyes too. I tried to sit up and hug her, but intense pain throughout my body made it impossible to move. "Stay still," my mom said softly, touching my hand. Her touch brought me comfort, and I began to feel calmer. My parents told me that although I had hit my head and various parts of my body quite hard, the injuries were not severe, and I could be discharged from the hospital if there were no problems. Ruby then told me about finding me collapsed at the entrance when she returned from school. I was so shocked. I didn't know what to do, so I immediately called Dad. I told him you were hurt and that he needed to come home right away, but he said it was impossible because he was at work, and he hung up. Ruby looked down sadly. "So, Ruby, you called me. You were so panicked that I immediately called an ambulance. I was truly shocked. What exactly happened?" As I started to explain, Ruby came into view. "Ruby, could you wait outside the room for a bit?" I didn't want Ruby to hear this. I told my parents about the mistreatment from my husband over the more than 10 years since Ruby was born. I also told them that today's injury was because he pushed me while trying to meet his mistress. My parents listened silently to my story. After a moment of silence, Dad slowly started to speak. "Come back home with Ruby," he said kindly. Then, suddenly, his tone changed. "And we'll have to make sure Jacob pays for what he did to Susan. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." I had never seen Dad with such a fierce expression before, or after that moment. His words made me decide to divorce immediately. I was determined. Just like Dad said, we would make my husband pay. I called Ruby back into the room and told her about my decision to divorce. Ruby nodded strongly, showing her support. Together, the four of us started planning our counterattack against my husband. We decided as a family to put on an act. The day after I was discharged, my mom and I returned home and my husband called my mobile phone. The act began. My mom answered the phone. In a somber voice, she said, "My daughter has passed away." The call was on speaker mode, and we were recording it. "What?" My husband gasped upon hearing my mom's words. "Ruby has?" It seemed like he was confused by the sudden news. "What are you talking about? My daughter, your wife, Susan." My mom raised her voice, a masterful performance. "What?" My husband was clearly shaken, even over the phone. "This is the only chance," my mom continued. "She hit her head hard when she fell. Jacob, does that ring any bells?" My husband became even more flustered in his response. "What? No, nothing at all." Then he added in a forced, tearful voice. "Susan was fine yesterday morning, sending me off cheerfully. How could this happen so suddenly?" He lied smoothly. I almost shouted out, but quickly covered my mouth. My mom knew I had been pushed by my husband. The tone of my mom's voice dropped after hearing my husband's lie. "I see. By the way, Jacob, where are you now? You didn't come to the hospital yesterday either." The anger in her words was unmistakable, surely reaching my husband as well. "Well, I'm currently on a business trip," he said, clearly flustered. "Come home right away. We're bringing our daughter back home." My mom's tone became firmer. "I'll have to finish my work first, so it'll take me about half a day to get home." My husband replied, to which my mom pressed on. "Just hurry back!" After hanging up, we rushed to prepare for the next step in our plan. I went to a lawyer with the evidence of the affair I had gathered and the recordings from the voice recorder. Along the way, we checked our home's bank accounts and life insurance to monitor my husband's movements. There were no withdrawals or insurance claims, indicating that he hadn't fled. Finally, we sent Ruby to stay with my sister for safety and waited at my parents' house for my husband to return. When he returned home at night, we, who had been fully prepared, were taken aback to see him. Astonishingly, he had brought his mistress with him. Seeing me, both were at a loss for words. "Who is this woman?" I demanded, my anger rising. My husband blurted out almost immediately, "Why are you here? You tricked me!" His voice cracked and his face turned red. "Who is she?" I pressed, ignoring his question. He continued to question me instead of answering. "You were supposed to take her to your parents' house, weren't you?" I couldn't comprehend his nerve to bring his mistress home after hearing I had died. My feelings of blaming my husband intensified. "This is my house. It's only natural I come back here. Never mind that. Explain who she is now." I pushed him for answers. "No, it's not like that. She's from a client's company." He stammered, still attempting to lie. I laid out several photos of him with his mistress, obtained from the detective agency. "I've investigated. This woman, she's in these photos with you," I pointed out. His face went pale. "Those must be doctored or something." He tried to deflect it, still lying. How far could this man jest? Pointing to the date on the photos, I confronted him. "These were taken on the days you said you were on business trips. The detective agency confirmed you were on leave from work. Who's the liar now? Why is the woman in these photos here?" Seeing his excuse fall apart was a clear indication that he had no way out. "No, it's because she had some business with me." Cutting him off, the mistress introduced herself. "I'm Mary. I was under the impression we were in a relationship heading towards marriage. You're Jacob's sister, right? I was told you had passed away, but you're alive?" I corrected her. "I'm not his sister, I'm his wife." Now it was her turn to be confused. "Wife? Jacob told me he was living with his sister." My anger reached a boiling point. I glared at my husband, filled with anger that was evident even to myself. "What did you say?" As the truth unfolded, my husband began to look frightened, but still, unbelievably, tried to make excuses without offering an apology. "There's a reason for this. It's a misunderstanding. When I said we were seeing each other, I meant as a client. I'll explain everything later." My husband tried to explain, but even his mistress seemed to grasp the situation now. "Jacob, what is this all about? You lied about your sister dying, and now it turns out she wasn't your sister, but your wife?" She confronted him fiercely. "I was deceived too," he retorted, trying to deflect his guilt. I calmly stated, "The one who was deceived here is me. For years you've been cheating on me, lying about business trips to meet her, and even pushed me to the extent of getting injured. You ignored our daughter's call, shaking with worry, because you were busy at work and didn't even come to the hospital. Then, thinking it would be convenient for you if I were dead, you brought her home. Who do you think was deceived?" She looked at my husband with disdain and said, "You did all that to your wife? So if we had gotten married, the same could have happened to me. You're the worst." "I wouldn't do that because I love Mary," he insisted. As I confronted him for admitting to his affair, he denied it, clearly shaken. Unlike my increasingly agitated husband, I became more composed. "This is the worst case scenario," I remarked. My parents, having witnessed everything, looked at him coldly. He had no one on his side. I had no love left for my husband. "We're getting a divorce," I declared, pushing him away, and she announced she was leaving him too. To my husband, who looked as if he might collapse, I said, "Pushing me and causing injury is a crime in itself, and there's evidence of your affair. I've already started talking to a lawyer, so be prepared." "You lied about being single and deceived me. Isn't that marital fraud? I want compensation for my wasted time." She was his mistress, but now we were both deceived by the same man. We felt like comrades in arms. "I didn't deceive anyone. I was the one deceived. And Susan's injury was her own fault, not because I pushed her. If you say it's my fault, show me the evidence," he defiantly claimed. I pressed play on the voice recorder, revealing our conversation from the morning he pushed me. This isn't the only evidence. I have recordings of all the verbal abuse you've thrown at me over the years. There's no escaping this. I have proof, too. The WhatsApp messages from when we met at the singles party, where you lied about living with your sister, she added. Realizing there was no way out, my husband lashed out. Shut up, you ugly and fat! If you were gone, I could have gotten the insurance money and married her. He looked at her with regret. After all, Mary is the daughter of a major company executive. Marrying her would have secured my promotion. You've ruined everything, you ugly and fat. In a fit of rage, he started throwing things at me and lunged towards me. That's when my dad, a bus driver who's also an experienced wrestler, restrained him. Then, she stood in front of my immobilized husband and slapped him back and forth. This one's for me, and this is for his wife, she said, delivering a powerful knee strike to his groin. My husband collapsed on the floor, writhing in pain. Unfortunately for you, even if I had died, you wouldn't have received any life insurance money because I've made my parents the beneficiaries. Also, this house is in my parents' name, not yours. He had assumed everything would automatically become his without even knowing these facts. You were only with me because I'm the daughter of an executive. You're truly the lowest. I'm glad we didn't get married. Nothing is going your way. How unfortunate. Now please leave immediately. Struggling, my husband managed to get up and staggered out of the house. Afterward, the divorce was finalized smoothly. With the help of a lawyer, we were able to secure compensation in the divorce proceedings. Once my husband left, I invited my parents over, and we decided to live together as a family of 4, including Ruby. The compensation from the divorce was used for the house's remodeling. A former colleague from my office days informed me about my ex-husband's fate. He was demoted after his affair with Mary, who he lied about being unmarried to, was discovered by the company. Given the nature of his actions, he struggled with relationships at the new location and eventually resigned. Although he received a retirement allowance, it was quickly used up to pay the compensation claimed by me and Mary. Despite being a victim herself, Mary, after understanding the situation, sent me a letter of apology and even compensation for the trouble caused. She later married a genuinely single man. A piece of news that made me genuinely happy, considering her previous ordeal with my ex-husband. Post-divorce, my savings-themed blog gained even more popularity, catching a publisher's eye, leading to a book deal. What started as a means to escape an abusive situation turned into an unexpected career path. I've even started writing a savings column for a lifestyle magazine. Despite being new to this, the reception has been very positive. Ruby seems to understand that her father abandoned us when I was injured and shows no interest in seeing him. She seems much happier now than before the divorce. Lately, I've been receiving messages from my ex-husband, pressing for reconciliation. I've decided to start over from scratch. I believe I've changed a lot from those days. So, how about we live together again? You must be longing for human warmth by now. I believe no one but me, who has been with you for so long, can truly understand you. I'm open to getting back together. If you feel the same, let me know. I'll be waiting anytime. I love you. Such creepy messages have been persistently sent. Due to their persistence, I replied that I would consult a lawyer if he continued to message me, and then blocked him. Does he think clinging to me would lead to reconciliation? He's greatly mistaken. I'm not that forgiving. Isn't it too late for self-reflection now? He should have realized what needed to be changed much earlier. Whenever I come across the phrase, actions have consequences, I'm reminded of him, because I know no one else who fits it so well. Thus, my life, now free from my ex-husband, is fulfilling. I truly feel like I'm enjoying life. Recently, my parents, sister, daughter, and I went on a vacation to a resort area. I planned it to express my gratitude towards my family. I was really happy that we could all enjoy the resort, as I've been busy with housework, childcare, and work. Ruby has expressed a desire to adopt a cat, a sentiment I share. We plan to discuss getting a cat on our next day off, a small yet joyful addition to our daily happiness.